There are dire warnings that New South Wales will be hit by increasingly extreme weather.
2015 was the hottest year since climate records began.
Figures show this July was the single hottest month in recorded history.
Australia sweltered through its hottest spring on record.
Climate change is now affecting every country on every continent.
It's the rate that's of great concern.
And what do you put that rate down to?
Oh, it's human activity.
We have everything we need. Some still doubt that we have the will to act, but I say the will to act is itself a renewable resource.
Hello and welcome. My name is Mark, and you're listening to Climactic, the flagship podcast of the Climactic Collective, an independent network of podcasts all engaged in some way with the climate crisis. Today's episode is from Nourishing Matters to Chew On, a new show to join the Climactic Collective, hosted by Anthea Fawcett. NMTCO, as it's called, is a podcast that takes its cue from big picture, healthy and sustainable food system agendas, and digs in to explore what these change agendas mean for us here in Australia. It looks at how we produce and enjoy food in a climate change future, as well as how we value the people, places, and animals that nourish us. You can join host Anthea Fawcett, a sustainability advocate, founder of FoodSwell, and farmer's daughter, as she journeys across our food and agricultural landscape to speak with inspiring people in the field who are enabling change towards more sustainable and resilient food systems. Find all the episodes of this great weekly show and subscribe from climactic.fm. And there's also links in the show notes. Before I leave you in the very capable hands of Anthea, I will just say this is the last week before Earth Day, April 22nd. Now, that's a day that obviously means quite a bit to communities and groups all across the world. But here at Climactic, it means it's our birthday, and we'll be starting our 4th year as a podcast and our 2nd year as a network. It's also the day that we've asked Apple Podcasts to add a climate category onto the Podcasters Declare campaign. And if you haven't signed our open letter yet at podcastersdeclare.com, I ask that you do so, joining over 1,000 other podcast listeners and podcast makers, asking Apple to give equal weight to the climate crisis that they give to true crime, politics, tech, and many other things. If you have signed, thank you so much, and we'd appreciate it greatly if you could share the word with a friend or print out one of our great posters to put up in your workplace, your school, or your local lamppost. Thanks, and enjoy this great episode of Nourishing Matters to Chew On.
In this episode, I speak with two of Australia's most eminent agricultural research scientists about a really important workshop that's just been held. The episode's in 2 parts. I hope you'll enjoy hearing from Dr Colin Chartres and Dr Dan Walker and I. Welcome to Nourishing Matters to Chew On, a podcast that takes its cue from big picture, healthy and sustainable food system agendas and digs in to explore their implications and how they are landing here in Australia. I'm Anthea Fawcett, founder of FoodSwell, sustainability advocate and a farmer's daughter from New South Wales. Join me on a weekly journey across our food and agricultural landscapes as I speak with inspiring people who are tackling parts of the wicked puzzle to enable change toward a healthier, more sustainable, fair and resilient food system and environment. I acknowledge the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which this podcast is recorded throughout Australia and recognise their continuing connections to land, water and culture. I acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Agriculture is both driving climate change and strongly impacted by it. The impact of Australia's worst summer of bushfires, a changing political approach globally, and more calls for net zero emissions by 2050 have increased the focus on climate action. It's a really hot topic for Australian farmers and researchers. Joining me to talk about some of the ways that Australian researchers and farmers can and are taking action is Dr Colin Chartres. Colin is the CEO of the Crawford Fund, an honorary professor in the Crawford School of Public Policy at ANU, and an eminent scientist with deep experience in water, soil and rural science research, policy and agricultural development in Australia and internationally. Welcome, Colin. Thank you very much for taking time to speak with me today.
Thank you, Anthea.
It's a real privilege to speak with you from the Crawford Fund. Exactly what farmers can and are doing to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions is really just such a huge topic. But building the conversations to help promote farmer-led action, as well as the research that is required to build meaningful solutions, is all key to the picture. Colin, you and your colleagues at the Crawford Fund and at the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, ACIAR, are leading the way to help do just that. You're holding a really important workshop in March that's all about farmer-led, science-based greenhouse gas mitigation strategies for Australia and abroad. To help lead us in, can you perhaps tell us about what the Crawford Fund's purpose is and what its key objectives are?
We're a non-for-profit NGO. We focus in particular on providing training and public awareness around topics of international agriculture development, particularly in the research and development sector. Mm-hmm. We also we do run national conference at Parliament House, and also some of the workshops like the one that you just mentioned.
And you also do a lot for young Australians in their careers, studies and volunteering for food and nutrition security, I understand.
Yeah, we have approximately 500 plus, or maybe 700 members now of the what's called the Researchers in Agriculture for International Development, the RAID network. They're really sort of the next generation of researchers and young farmers. Very active, and we try and link them into some of our mainstream projects, as well as helping them forge links with people overseas working in agriculture, which of course is difficult at the moment because of COVID and travel restrictions.
That's so important. And how do you work with ACIAR or complement what they do?
Well, ACIAR are one of our major funders, but as well as the funding, we really try and build on what ACIAR are doing in their projects. We provide training in areas that ACIAR sometimes doesn't directly touch on. For example, a few years ago, we jointly recognised with ACIAR the fact that a lot of people who are emerging in their scientific careers overseas haven't had the training in research, leadership and management that they need, that will help them. So we put on an annual training course in that area, usually again overseas. And similarly, we've been running that course in a modified format for people in the RAID network. We also work with ACIAR to extend work from some of their projects. They've funded, for example, work on fisheries and fish passageways in the Mekong. We have sort of followed them and built on extension workshops in that kind of area. So it's a very mutually complementary sort of relationship in that sense.
And really long-term strategic investment for the benefit of Australia's connections with the region, but also for developing countries in the region.
Well, I think, we look at this, we try and look at it from several ways. One is there are direct benefits to farmers and agricultural systems overseas through the increased knowledge and help we can give them. Secondly, there clearly are some soft diplomacy type of benefits that flow onto Australia from having good relationships built up scientist to scientist. Thirdly, by building networks across various areas, for example, quarantine and biosecurity, we get forewarning of diseases and pests that may hit Australia. Sometimes we can do something about it. Sometimes with things like fall armyworm, we've probably missed the boat. And also there's another aspect of aid that our expenditure in this area, not so much the Crawford Fund, but ACIAR in particular, they fund the international system called the CGIAR, which is a network of 14 or 15 international research centres who do everything from plant breeding to water management in agriculture and policy development. And from there, Australia has gained phenomenal benefit in terms of new varieties which have been developed for wheat and maize and other crops, which have then been reintroduced at no real cost to Australia to benefit our farmers. So it's there's a lot of win-win situations here, both in the direct agricultural side, the assistance to the helping farmers in this country, helping farmers overseas, and in the soft diplomacy type of area.
Okay, so turning now to the workshop that the Crawford Fund and ACIAR are holding in March, Can you tell us about what it aims to do, who you hope will attend? I understand it's already very heavily subscribed, and perhaps who will benefit from its findings going forward.
Certainly. I mean, it really stemmed from discussions that arose a couple of years ago with our chairman, John Anderson, the ex-Deputy Prime Minister, who's very passionate about the role that Australian farmers can play in terms of sequestering soil carbon. And we were sort of stimulated by a presentation from Professor Ross Garnaut, again about 18 months ago in this area. And an opportunity arose when Australia, through ACIAR, is taking on the chairmanship of the Council of what's called the Global Research Alliance for Greenhouse Gas Mitigation, or Greenhouse Gases in Agriculture is the correct title. So ACIAR asked us to set this workshop up, which really looked at the way in which farmers are already contributing to solutions to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture. It's very, very topical. As you know, most people are pushing hard for a net zero carbon target by 2050. And a number of farmers and a number of scientists believe that although it won't be easy and it's not straightforward, agriculture can contribute in a very significant way to meeting this particular target. We did some calculations a while back which looked at this, and the numbers are mind-boggling and very difficult, so I won't quote them specifically, but essentially carbon sequestration by agriculture, and that is absorbing carbon in roots, in vegetation and in the soil, could actually equal or even double the agricultural production of greenhouse gases if we get this right. So, for example, agriculture could sequester between 55 and 164 megatons of carbon per year when its current emissions are about 72. So it's certainly possible, but there are a lot of questions around that, and that's one of the things we want to bring up in the workshop in March.
Fantastic. And just quickly, obviously there's a great lineup of very impressive speakers, but would you like to just flag some of the key people who, from farming research, other groups who will be speaking at the workshop?
Well, I guess if I can be controversial, there are two camps here. There are the farmers who are not in our workshop, and we're all very positive, but there are the farmers who think something can be done and are looking at the ways that agriculture has shown great adaptability in Australia. And then there are some other sort of camps who don't think that's possible and want to see the status quo. We're very much on the positive and want to look at what can be done. So we've got Fiona Simpson, who's chair of the ACIAR Commission, but also importantly, president of the National Farmers Federation, giving us a broad introduction. And then we've got three key farmers who are both advocating for better management of carbon in agriculture or greenhouse gases in agriculture, through to people who are actual practitioners. And they are Lucinda Corrigan, who comes from the Renelli Pastoral Company in Holbrook, New South Wales. Mark Wootton, who's the owner of Jigsaw Farms, which is down in the Horsham area of Victoria. He's looking at how forestry and carbon and indigenous plantings can be linked in with higher productivity grazing. Lucinda's really working more on cattle, greenhouse gas emissions in a cattle producing farm. And then Terry McCosker from Queensland, who's really sort of working with large groups of farmers looking at strategies and incentives for carbon sequestration in both cropping and pastoral systems. So, they're three people who are already at the forefront of doing this, and we want to learn from their experience in the field, both what succeeded and what the problems are.
And they'll get to speak with researchers who are helping develop those methodologies to document and capture the value of it all, which is so important.
Well, I think they probably are already. They're very much in tune with the science. Often in agriculture, sometimes the researchers build off practitioners, and as well as vice versa. So it's a symbiotic relationship, I think.
Yeah. So further to that, I was going to ask you to perhaps flag one or two of the practical success stories of technologies or research or on-farm initiatives in Australia to reduce greenhouse gases that will be discussed, but you just have. But what are some of the ones that most excite you, or just, what's one that really excites you personally, given your interests?
Well, I think the thing which, rather than going to anything specific, which we can talk about more after the conference, I mean, there are some very exciting innovations coming up. One is the way in which adaptation of the rumen of cattle and other animals with things like seaweed can be made so that they're producing far less methane. I think there's some great potential there. I think also in terms of the sequestration of carbon, what people don't realize is that because we're dealing with vast areas of soils and land, we only need to sort of change the carbon storage in the soil in a small way. For example, if we could increase the amount of carbon by about 0.4%, and that's quite a lot, because often Australian soils only have 1.5% carbon. But when you multiply that small increase out over vast areas, you can really sort of build up the amount of carbon sequestered in the landscape. In some, I think that the other thing which is interesting is that most of the literature suggests that it's going to be much harder in cultivated soils because these are turned over even with minimum tillage and material is taken off them in quite large amounts. So it's going to be quite difficult in many of those soils. It's easier in pastures in terms of improving the soil carbon levels by good pasture measurement and good grazing practice. But again, there are other ways that we haven't even really delved into as yet. In cultivated farms, maybe setting aside small areas for carbon reserves could be a possibility. I think the one that hasn't really even been discussed in detail yet is given the fact that farmers have large amounts of area, they can easily set up small solar farms. And if we had the right incentives and the right technologies that are developed, we could turn most farm machinery over to electric machinery driven from renewable energy. And that again would eat into the very, very large amounts of diesel that are used by agriculture in Australia and make the whole system much more sustainable. So I think those are two of the areas. There are a lot of difficulties, as I've mentioned, but I think one of the things we're hoping to hear from some of these farmers is how they've overcome the difficulties, and secondly, from the scientists, what the opportunities are in terms of both building carbon, minimising its emission, but also in terms of measurement and how we actually can really grasp that in an economic way. I mean, if I understand that if we can get the measurement of changes in carbon down to a few dollars per hectare, the whole thing may become quite economic. And the returns can be quite good, quite large, because there are people willing to pay for carbon credits. I was told recently of a farm in Queensland which has just received $500,000 of credits from Microsoft, which is a significant amount of money.
Colin, thank you for that. That's actually really inspiring. Just an increase of 0.4% could, in broadacre and elsewhere, could just make such a huge difference. I didn't know that. That's quite exciting. Colin, over your career, you've worked extensively around soils with CSIRO and other organisations, such on things like soil acidity, structure and salinity issues and their impacts on agriculture. I was wondering what you currently see as the highest order soil challenges for Australian agriculture, and has the picture changed much since your days at CSIRO? I suppose I'm particularly wondering how you see climate change impacting now on soil health and healthy landscapes.
Complex question to answer quickly. No, it's fine. Look, I think, my career has been built around looking at various issues associated with soil degradation. We had major issues with salinity, which, as the climate has dried slightly, have probably become a little bit less, ironically. I've worked on soil acidification, which is still an issue, but we know how to manage that. It can be an expensive thing to manage. I think probably one of the critical issues for Australian agriculture is going to be water availability, as it is elsewhere in the world. We know of the issues in the Murray-Darling Basin, so sustainably intensifying agriculture to make the most of every drop of water is going to be vital, because there is going to be less in the system. That's a very, very important issue for irrigation farmers in terms of the efficiency of their systems and making sure there is water left for the environment, as well as water taken out initially for towns and other industries. But I think this is where it comes back to there is potentially a win-win with carbon sequestration, because we know that as we build up small percentages of carbon in the soil, if we go from 1 to 1.2% or something like that, that small increase in carbon does a number of critical things. It increases the soil's ability to form good aggregates. That allows water to be absorbed. The soils don't crust as badly. It allows the water to be absorbed. The water is stored. It can be stored deeper if we get the carbon deeper in the profile. And also it has a phenomenal impact on the microbes in the soil. So we can build up what are described as healthier soils with more flourishing microbial communities, which are really, really critical in terms of increasing both the chemical and the physical fertility of soil. So more water in the soil, more nutrients being turned over, better crops, and more productivity and more efficiency. So there's a win-win there with carbon and soil health immediately.
It's soil biodiversity in the soil, isn't it? After the drought and so much media coverage of the, huge dust storms and this sort of sense of encroaching deserts, and there's the drought resilience strategy and fund that the Commonwealth set up. Would you like to comment on drought and just how getting more carbon into the soil means perhaps more moisture in the soil that can help turn back dust storms and other things like that?
A lot of it's it's a combination of climate or climate drying, climate change, climate variability, and also management practices. I mean, not all, but many of the big dust storms we have seen in the past have been associated with drought, and then also with areas where there's a large amount of fallowing of soil, so that the wind just whips up the surface soil and blows away a lot of the surface layers. So clearly there is a need to sort of put into practice a lot of the learnings that we've made over the last 50 years or so in terms of wind erosion, and that is getting cover on the surface, not ploughing and not removing residues, not having bare fallow soils. And in some cases, there are opportunities for windbreaks in the sort of slightly moister areas, which do have a big impact. But again, it's really making sure that farmers understand the importance of surface cover. I think in terms of drought, it's inevitable with climate change. We're going to have more frequency of the kind of cycles we've seen this century, i.e. the millennium drought, and then followed by the recent drought. And that means these techniques of management are going to be even more critical, so that if we do build up good organic matter levels in the years like this year, when there has been plenty of rain over much of the agricultural area of eastern and southern Australia, maybe not in the southwest, we can make sure that the soils are stable and they are not prone to wind erosion through good management practices. But that's always going to be an issue for us here in Australia, and that also is, we have adapted to some of these issues. We have minimised erosion significantly, both water and wind erosion, particularly since rabbits were controlled in the 1930s. And farmers are very adaptable. They've done a great job in many of these cases. And again, that's one of the, if you like, the selling points that we're using to say to people overseas in similar environments. We have learned to adapt in some ways. Some of these techniques might work in your area. It's not, we don't want to say that you take them lock, stock and barrel, because they need to be adapted. There may be social, cultural, educational differences, but providing at least the background information about what did work, and then through projects of ACIAR and others looking to see if they may work and can be adapted locally elsewhere, in other countries.
Colin, what you've just spoken about there, strategies for on-farm management, it also perhaps links in with landscape-wide planning, doesn't it? And farmers in a region connecting and sharing mutually supportive activities that are good for landscape-wide planning's NRM and catchment management, perhaps.
Absolutely. I've always been a great supporter of the land care movement, bush care, and other movements of that nature. I mean, many of these were initiated by government, but land care now has its international arm, which is using some of the social and organisational skills we learned here, along with some of the technical understanding to be used in other countries. So I think that we're not going to manage these issues in front of us through individual action alone. There has to be action which is coordinated across catchments, across river basins, across communities, because not everything's going to be equally applicable in different landscapes and different soils. So it really is a kind of an approach which looks at the differences in the landscape, the similarities, and then brings in the appropriate technologies. And in my view, there does need to be some fairly strong government support and incentives provided to help with this. We could do it another way, but if we did it another way, it would be the cost of food would be astronomical, because we'd be building all these externalities into the cost of food, and that just wouldn't work globally. In an economic.
It's a public good and a natural capital good.
Yeah.
Enabling the networks to happen and collaborate together.
Well, it always stems back to things like the commons, where no one's responsible and the resource becomes degraded. And I don't think any of us want that. I think we do want landscapes which are both stable and productive and supporting people, rather than vast areas of uninhabited landscape, which then will have other problems of management with feral animals and all sorts of things.
Thank you. Just thinking about nutrition security and the quality of food, soils are obviously the ground that make our food possible, and climate change is impacting on the nutrient profile of some important staple crops. Is there perhaps a particular current example of Australian soil research or related research that Australia is now sharing with developing countries to specifically help address nutrition security in staples that you might know of or like to share?
Look, I think I can't pinpoint one thing there. I think Australian soil science is really focused on a lot of national challenges, which started with the fact that our soils are very, very low in phosphorus, and also we're lacking a lot of trace elements. And the CSIRO back in the 50s and early 60s really sort of helped us overcome those issues. I think where international sort of soil science and crop science has moved in recent years, and Australia's played a big role in this, has been through looking at the gap in production between the potential biological production, which depends on the amount of sunlight, the amount of water coming into the system and so on, and actual production. And I think Australian farmers have done a great job there. Many farmers have got up to 70, 80% of potential production. There's still room for a little bit of improvement. Overseas, there's a lot of countries where that gap is still probably 40 or 50%. And it's taking some of the overall management techniques for soils, for management of weeds, for management of water, and putting them into an agricultural system where we're now seeing some of these gains.
So really significant information sharing to help productivity gains.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Colin, thank you. Do you have any other comments or quick thoughts you'd like to make or offer?
No, look, I think we've covered pretty well everything. I just want to go back to that 0.4% carbon increase. It's not 0.4% of the total amount there. It's an actual figure of an increase of about 0.4%. So, and that's quite a challenge. So, if you've got 1%, you've got to go to about 1.4%. to make that difference.
Thank you, Colin. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure to speak with you about the upcoming workshop and the work that you, the Crawford Fund and ACIAR are doing to build the conversations and the action for more farmer-led science-based greenhouse gas mitigation solutions. So good luck with the workshop, and I really look forward to speaking with Dr Walker from ACIAR after the workshop to learn more and to help share the really valuable outcomes from it.
Thank you very much, Anthony, and we look forward to talking again.
That's fantastic. Thanks very much, Colin. Welcome, Dan, and hello. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Anthony. Thanks for the opportunity.
It's such a pleasure to be able to speak with Dr. Dan Walker to hear about and to share insights from and highlights from the really important workshop that ACIAR and the Crawford Fund held this week, What Farmers Can Do, Farmer-Led Science-Based Greenhouse Gas Mitigation, Strategies for Australia and Abroad. And that workshop was all about innovative practices that are making a difference and setting future directions in research and for farmers. Dr. Daniel Walker is the Chief Scientist of the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, ACIAR, where, among many things, he oversees the strategic science focus of ACIAR's research portfolio and provides leadership for research program managers across 9 research areas, along with oversight of ACIAR's relationship with the Australian Innovation System. Prior to joining ACIAR in 2017, Dan spent 23 years at CSIRO, where he was Research Director for Agriculture and Global Change with CSIRO's Agriculture and Food. And prior to that, he was Chief of CSIRO Ecosystem Services. So Dan is eminently qualified to understand the challenges here in Australia and how Australian innovation may be able to contribute to agriculture and countries in our region. And Dan, you did such an excellent job in summing up the workshop discussions on the day during this week.
Thanks, Anthony.
Dan, before we discuss the workshop highlights, can you tell us about the Global Research Alliance on Greenhouse Gases in Agriculture, known as GRA, that ACIAR for Australia chairs, and whose council are also meeting this week, and that the workshop we're discussing today was planned to coincide with? Who's involved and what are the objectives of the GRA?
The GRA is a global initiative that was founded just over 10 years ago, initially by New Zealand, the United States and Australia, to get together the global research community in agricultural science as it relates to greenhouse gas emissions. Over the past 10 years, it's grown quite substantially. I think 64 member countries now and 24 member organisations, so significant international member organisations. And it has a series of working groups focusing on particular areas of greenhouse gas emissions research, and an annual council meeting where all those member countries and member organisations have the opportunity to come together to share best practice, experience and aspirations and needs in research related to greenhouse gas emissions. So there's a rotating chair. The chair for the last cycle was Indonesia. So a little over a year and a half ago, there was the council meeting in Indonesia hosted by the Indonesian government. And at that council meeting, Australia took over the deputy chair role. And then it was intended to be in October 2020, but actually delayed for all the obvious reasons with COVID to this month. Australia has now assumed the chair role. The council is meeting virtually this week, or has met virtually this week, actually finished up last night, again, to discuss council business, to look at bringing new members in, to review progress of the working groups and hear about the change across a very diverse portfolio of countries, member countries, from developing countries through Europe and the US, Australia, New Zealand, very different circumstances, but a common set of objectives in better understanding greenhouse gas emissions for agriculture and, very importantly, developing the science to measure and the technologies to reduce those emissions.
Oh, that's fantastic. So it's relatively new and it's in a very powerful position to help drive innovation in agriculture, research and action to tackle greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. Is that right?
Absolutely. And to avoid the risk of, countries across the world are facing the same issues. So as you know very well, that, agriculture and land use, depending where you are, contributes a very significant portion of greenhouse gas emissions. It's one of the two big sectors that, and as we make these rapid energy transitions in terms of energy sources, agriculture and land use is going to increasingly be a very dominant source of greenhouse gas emissions. So countries across the world are facing the same challenge. There's an opportunity to make sure we don't all reinvent the wheel and miss opportunities to share technologies for measurement, reporting, verification, technologies for reducing emissions, so that we can accelerate change in reducing emissions.
Yeah, that's so important. I think your CEO, Andrew Campbell, at the workshop said that climate change and nutrition security, or food, are the two big existential challenges. And he also spoke about the 3 Fs, fix the fuel system or the energy system, fix the food system, and the rest is frippery. Is that what he said?
I'm trying to remember what the third F was, but basically the message was there's a fuel system, the food system, and all the rest, which doesn't matter.
So turning to the workshop, just generally, and to lead us in and about how you felt and what the audience feedback was, how did you feel the workshop went in terms of attendance and its reach? I understand the proceedings are going to go online for free access. The sharing of the really rich information is going to continue. How did it go?
So I think it went very well. It might be worth giving a little bit of context to it. As you say, the workshop we ran in conjunction with the Crawford Fund, ran with some support from ACIAR, and the intention was to have that in conjunction with the council meeting for the Global Alliance. Now, we were intending to have all those member representatives from member states and from the international organisations in Australia, and our hope was, in conjunction with the 3 days of council meetings, which is a lot of sharing science and procedural activities, to provide the opportunity for those international delegates to see some of the activities that happen in Australia, to hear some of the research that's going on here, but also to see some of the activity within the agricultural sector in looking to understand and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So our hope was to have a large number of international delegates come and have a look at some of the best of what's going on in this country. Clearly that couldn't happen with border closures and so on. So we, in the end, moved to having this online, a mix of an online and face-to-face meeting. So here in Canberra, we were able to have some 50 or so people in the room, including presenters from agricultural leadership, some leading farmer practitioners in to really illustrate some of what's possible, some leading researchers, and Jamie Isbister, Australia's Ambassador for the Environment. So hearing from agricultural leadership, hearing from practitioners, and hearing the link into the policy space. So we were speaking to a room of 50 or so people, but had, I think, close to 400 people registered to observe online and participate in a series of polls. Now, it's very hard to know exactly how those people online felt the meeting went, but we had very impressive interaction. And in terms of polling response, people from very diverse countries providing their feedback into the meetings. From memory, we had responses from India, Mongolia, Fiji, Pakistan, Philippines, Bangladesh, Vietnam. So a real opportunity to achieve what we intended to, but in a different format, which is to contribute to the global debate by demonstrating some of what's happening here and some of the thinking that's going on within Australia.
I sat in on the workshop virtually.
Mm-hmm.
You could really sense how excited the presenters and the audience were to be speaking live to live people as well.
It was fabulous to have an analog as well as a digital meeting. So
yeah, absolutely, a meeting of great minds indeed. There were some amazing people presenting and in the room. And now to some highlights. The workshop showcased both farming and research innovations and challenges ahead.
Mm-hmm.
And it really focused on what is being done by farmers in both animal and cropping systems. What to you was, obviously there were so many, but what to you were some of the key, really standout highlights that struck you in terms of success stories underway in Australian agriculture that Australian agriculture can really build on here and now to reduce greenhouse gas emissions?
I guess one of the standouts from my perspective was the relationship between the ambition the Australian agriculture sector has and some of what's been achieved. So Fiona Simpson, the chair of the NFF, presented and talked about the NFF's 100 billion by 2030 agenda for Australian agriculture, which I'm sure will be familiar to a lot of listeners, highlighting that target is at the same time as approaching or trending towards zero net emissions by 2030 and reaching zero net emissions by 2050. So there's a clear target there from Australian agriculture. And we heard from Lucinda Corrigan, who is former chair of Farmers for Climate Action, again, about some of the very practical intent of that group to really accelerate towards that target. So there was significant ambition there, but that was married up with some really impressive, I thought, stories of practice on the ground. So Lucinda Corrigan, as well as being former chair of Farmers for Climate Action, is a beef producer from southern New South Wales, Renly, runs a very significant business there, and has a very impressive story about the extent to which they've been able to measure and understand their greenhouse gas emissions. And I should say, Richard Eckhardt from the University of Melbourne pointed out what many of your listeners will know, which is the largest single source of agricultural emissions is methane from livestock digestion. So it's a big problem. So for a cattle producer like Lucinda Corrigan, that a deep concern about climate change, that's a significant issue. So Lucinda was able to talk about what in their business they've done, not only to improve productivity and profitability and the efficiency of their production system, but to absolutely understand emissions and both land management and management of cattle to seek to reduce those emissions. Similarly, Mark Wootton from Southwest Victoria was able to talk about the work he's done in his family business, in building a family business, a very significant one in sheep, wool and meat, and in a large business that has managed to achieve carbon neutrality from, I think it was 2010 or 2011. So again, a very clear understanding of the issues, a very clear commitment to managing his business very effectively for profitability, but also for sustainability, and being able to demonstrate then the results that he'd been able to achieve. So really, I thought that conjunction between the ambition, but then the demonstration that there are leading farmers who are able to demonstrate the achievability of that ambition, I think was really quite inspiring. And then we heard from researchers, so Richard Eckhardt from University of Melbourne talking about research in livestock emissions, and as I say, talking about this very substantial challenge that the methane emission from ruminant animals is something has evolved over millions of years, and we're now seeking to change in a matter of decades. And one of the take-home messages from Richard was, from my point of view, was that he felt that until recently, we had options to reduce livestock methane emissions by around about 20%. So, that's pretty good, yes, but leaves a daunting 80%. He felt that there were technologies and understanding of methane genesis that were coming online now that actually gave us potential for reducing methane emissions by up to 80%. And that really is a potential game changer. Now, there's enormous challenges in both in those technologies and how they're rolled out, much easier in intensive production systems than for smallholder producers in developing countries and so on. But it did give a sense of possibility and things worth striving for. So we're not setting out on a fool's mission to reduce emissions in a way that simply isn't possible. So that was quite inspiring.
Yes, I found all of those speakers amazing, but Mark and Richard both put up slides that showed sort of the spectrum of the categorizations of different scientific ways of looking at ruminant breeding, selection, and then raising and production. And that part of the research challenge is also understanding the complexity across that spectrum of decision-making and where research should really focus now. So, for example, seaweed and changing digestion systems within current stock as they are genetically present, but looking at a whole spectrum of different research avenues across the life cycle of even the animals, how they're bred and then how they're raised. And there were just so many research questions to even understand the picture of where to start.
Yeah, so the ecology of the cattle rumen is astonishingly complex, and Richard's clear message was we're understanding that better and better, and but it's an extremely complex system, and you need to take a cold hard look at what's going on there and how the microflora in the rumen interact with feed and interact with the cattle, and the cattle interact with the landscape. And measurement, and as I say, taking a cold hard look at all those interventions. But I think the message was there are options there. They're challenging. And similarly, Marcia Sevenster from CSIRO was talking about emissions from cropping systems, and a similar but different complexity. And she was clearly demonstrating that whether you're in Western Australia or the cropping system in my part of the world in New South Wales or up into southern Queensland, emissions profiles are very different in different systems, and we can't simply find a one-size-fits-all change in agronomic practice which is going to reduce nitrous oxide emissions, for example, from cropping systems. It's again about measurement, and then understanding the intervention options and the consequence they have for emissions. So there's a lot of work to do, but the sense was there is the capacity and the technology and the understanding to make that plausible.
Yes, and the leadership and the innovation that's happening in the Australian agriculture sector and research sector is so important for overseas, isn't it? There was a slide, I can't remember who put it up, but it showed where the growth in ruminants is internationally, and it's very much in Africa and much of the developing world. And I suppose that's where people exactly like you and your colleagues at ACIAR have such a key role to play in sharing and disseminating the knowledge and measurement techniques and so forth.
Yes, that's right. So, at ACIAR, we have a fundamental role to play in helping to bring Australian research expertise and international research expertise to bear on the challenges facing smallholder farmers, people often in poverty. The paradox is of the still many hundreds of millions of people who don't have enough to eat. Most of them are smallholder farmers. So addressing the agriculture base is one of the best ways of lifting people out of poverty. At the same time, we need to do that in a way that's sustainable. And as you were saying, biggest growth in livestock numbers in sub-Saharan Africa, and that partly reflects the significant growth in population in sub-Saharan Africa. And that the role of livestock is very different in those contexts to Australia. Very much about nutritional security, financial security for families.
And livelihoods.
Absolutely. And a complex dynamic between them. So, a lot of the debate about the livestock sector as it plays out in Europe or the US or Australia plays very differently in those communities. So, but the rumens are by and large the same. So there's a lot of core understanding. What we need to be doing is working out how to translate that science into the broader systems and contexts of developing countries.
And something that sustainable landscapes and ecosystem services require is, I think we all increasingly recognise just how important animals in the landscape and on the landscape, well managed by people in the landscape who understand their catchments and their local environments is just so important. And yes, all that research around enabling and supporting ruminants to continue to play a key role in our agricultural systems is just so key, isn't it?
Yes, and there are multiple dimensions to that, but the one that's become much clearer in the last few years and decade or two is this their contribution to climate change, and hence there's a new complexity to that challenge of working with smallholder farmers to support their livelihoods.
And what about some of the longer term, very promising research or farming innovations on the horizon with regard to cropping? I know when I spoke with Dr Colin Chartres for the earlier part of this podcast, he really flagged just how great progress is being made in the animal production system and understanding of ruminants and so forth, as we've just discussed. But he said, indicated that some of the really big challenges and possibly some of the really big wins are in the cropping sector and with regard to soils and soil carbon. Would you like to talk about some of the issues there or some of the promising things on the horizon with regard to cropping systems?
Yeah, so I was saying that the very complex ecology in the rumen, there's equally complex ecology in terms of soils, soil structure, soil biology, and a clear understanding from researchers, from people supporting the agriculture sector, and from many farmers about the need to be paying very close attention to soil and soil health as an underpinning, not just for addressing greenhouse gas emissions issues and agricultural contribution, but just the sustainability and productivity of production systems. So Terry McCosker was able to talk about some of those complex dynamics. And again, soils are inherently very variable in space and time, respond to the climate, respond to management practices, respond to all kinds of other dynamics. Complexity in understanding what's going on in soils in terms of soil biology and the physics and chemistry that determine how much carbon is accumulated in soils, for example, in understanding what that means for production, water in the soils and so on and so forth, and then potentially for understanding what that means for markets and providing various incentives and mechanisms for rewarding people for managing. It's a very complex space, but again, increasing understanding in all those different layers of the challenge, from the soil biology through to the markets and incentives for behaviour change. So Terry McCosker was able to talk really across that full span, and I think for enormous amount to absorb there, but again, a sense of very significant challenges, but significant progress. I was struck, John Anderson, the chair of the Crawford Fund and Australia's former Deputy Prime Minister, one of the key challenges he outlined in some introductory stuff as a farmer in his own right was that he felt he really hoped and needed quick, affordable, reliable, and user-friendly means of measuring soil carbon to enable then management response for him and for other farmers. Now that's a really important aspiration, but not a trivial technical challenge.
That's right, and people can then, as you say, measure and value, but also feel rewarded about why what they're doing is so important, and they can capture it and really communicate just the amazing change they're making in terms of reducing greenhouse gas emissions and getting more organic carbon back into the soil. I thought Terry McCosker's presentation was really extraordinary. There was so much rich detail in that, and he was all about biology, wasn't he? About understanding exactly what you've just said, the complexity of the things that need to be understood, measured, and built up over time. But something else he also said that I thought was very uplifting was that he said, yes, it's about productivity and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but he also said that, when soils are really healthy and the biology is really pumping, it makes the soils so much more resilient to extreme events. And I think drought and now these hideous floods we've just been having, that idea that for so many linked up reasons, focusing on soils is just so key, isn't it?
Yeah, that was a very clear message, as you say, from Terry McCosker, and a lot of insights into the dynamics behind it. But equally from Mark Wootton, he said, measuring soil carbon was something he thought was fundamentally important, and his key motivation for doing that was not about reducing emissions, although he felt there was a real value in that, or sequestering carbon. It was about improving the resilience and productivity of his production system, and he felt all the other benefits were icing on the cake. There was enough from his point of view.
Okay, Dan, what do you consider to be some of the really key research issues that the workshop perhaps helped to identify as being ones that need much more further research, either by researchers at universities and elsewhere, but also in terms of on-farm trial work and innovation, and clearly measurements a key one. Were there areas of research that perhaps surprised you as standout needs?
I think, and this might sound a bit sort of a bit orthogonal to what you're asking, if that's not a terrible word to use. What really stood out for me was this increasing understanding of the system from a research scientist point of view, but from the other end, this ambition from industry, this real, at least for some, really leading producers, a real appetite for the knowledge and a real capacity to then apply that, explore it, understand it, and feed back into the research system. So I think what came through for me very clearly, and I think we do very well in Australia, is linking fundamental science through to application in farming systems, through to the policy landscape. And as Jamie Isbister, the Ambassador of Rum, was saying, we have a role to play through initiatives like the GRA and taking that then to the world. So it's about connecting all the pieces of the jigsaw and doing that again and again and again, and making sure there's a tight, close relationship between research and practice. So in the sort of jargon in our world, that's what we call transdisciplinary science, where we're really taking all the people involved in knowledge discovery, but also creating the innovations and working out how to create value from those innovations, both in terms of agricultural productivity and resilience, and in the context of the focus of this workshop, reducing greenhouse gas emissions as a result. So it's really about connecting everything up. And as we were saying on the day, this workshop is linked to the UN Food System Summit, and that's really a core theme for this whole global agenda this year, is how you build dialogue across all the stakeholders in food systems to understand that every change everywhere has a consequence somewhere else, and you need a really collective view of that to be nudging the food system in the right direction, so that we have, as Andrew Campbell was saying, the address the food and nutritional security, that significant challenges still for the globe. At the same time, I was addressing the impact of the food system on global climate. So it's really about tying it all together rather than particular silver bullets, if that makes sense.
And what you're doing and what ACIAR and the Crawford Fund are doing are absolutely providing the highly informed and inspirational glue to do that. So it's just so exciting to see what you are all doing. And the workshop, it really was very inspiring, exactly as you say, in terms of ambition. I jotted down one of the polls at the end, just reiterates what you have been saying, that in terms of farmers' views about what were the most significant challenges to farmers embracing solutions, it was a really positive message that came through in this poll. 21% said the challenge was how to measure. 35% said it was about access to knowledge and technology. 18% said it was about financial capital to invest in innovations. And 18% said it was about galvanising values and commitment. But that paints a really positive picture of the will and desire for change, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And the truth is, it's about all those things. And that's, I'm sure all the respondents to that survey would have known that. It was, which do you think is the most constraining or the most significant? And the fact is that spread across those different areas really, I think, underlines that understanding. So,
Dr. Walker, thank you so much for speaking with me today. Are there any final comments or further thoughts you'd like to, or call-outs that you might like to make?
If anyone's interested, there is a website for the GRA, which is up at the moment. And actually on that website, there are a series of videos, including, we were talking about Lucinda Corrigan and Mark Wooten's farms. There's some videos showing work that's been going on those on that site, just short 4 or 5 minute videos, and other, they're two, I think, standout exemplars, but there are many others. So we have some other farmers who've been doing, I think, quite astonishing things in rice and so on. So I really encourage people to go and have a look at that.
Dr. Walker, are the proceedings from the workshop that was held this week going to be available free online? And where can people go and watch or access each of the presentations?
So the Crawford Fund will have a lot of material online. So I really suggest you go to the Crawford Fund website. And as I say, this is actually Australia's first independent summit dialogue for the UN Food System Summit. So we will be providing a report into the UN Food System Summit website, just on highlights from, there's very strict reporting requirements, but that'll be a means of getting a summary as well, and potentially having a look at the very diverse other dialogues that are happening within the context of the UN Food System Summit.
Dan, thanks so much for speaking with me, and all power to you for what you and your colleagues are doing. It's a source of inspiration and practical action. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anthea. That's great. Talk soon. See you. Bye.
To learn more about the Global Research Alliance on agricultural greenhouse emissions, go to globalresearchalliance.org, and to listen to the presentations and proceedings from the workshop discussed in this episode, go to the Crawford Fund's website at crawfordfund.org. Thanks for listening. I hope this conversation offered some nourishing food for thought. To listen to more episodes of Nourishing Matters to Chew On, head to Foodswell's podcast page at foodswell.org.au/nourishing, or you can subscribe via Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Google, or wherever you get your podcasts. And stay in touch via Instagram at Nourishing Matters or Foodswell Australia. As this is a new podcast, we'd really value your support. So please give us a rating or review in your favourite podcast app so other people can find us too. Nourishing Matters to Chew On is proud to be on the Climactic network of podcasts and part of a collective of podcasters dedicated to inspiring positive action around climate change. Check out the other great podcasts on the Climactic network.